Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Two Creeps in a Gas Station by Musician Waste. Some background info. I was 24 at the time, and so was my husband. Our daughter was 2. We were on a road trip to go see family, and about 20 minutes outside of the town we lived was this big gas station with a wide variety of snacks. Whenever we went on a trip, we would always stop there for gas, drinks, and snacks, and it was the middle of the day in the middle of summer. We pulled in and hubby found a pump to fill up at. We'd all gone to the bathroom before we left the house, so I left our daughter in the car while he filled up, and then I went inside to fill our water bottles and grab some snacks. Like I said, this gas station was fairly large for the area, but not huge or anything. The bathrooms and water fountain, like the water bottle filler thing, were down a fairly secluded hallway. There was only one cashier and the line was kind of long, so I decided to buy the snacks first, and then go into the hallway to fill the water bottles on the way out in case the line got longer. Meanwhile, my husband had finished pumping gas and pulled into a parking spot in front of the building to wait for me. But all of the windows were covered with posters and stuff, so I didn't notice. Anyway, while I was in line holding our snacks and water bottles in my arms, a couple of guys immediately got in line behind me. They were tall. I'm like 5'10", which is tall for a woman, so I had estimated they were 6 foot at least. They wore very nondescript clothes, khaki shorts and blank gray t-shirts. I didn't hear them speak any English, and I can't 100% confirm what language they spoke, but it sounded Middle Eastern. Not super unusual for the area because there was a big college town nearby. Especially after having my daughter, I don't like anyone being directly behind me, even my family. So I turned my body so the guys were in my peripheral vision and looking at a display of kid toys while I waited. I do this move a lot when I'm waiting in a line, and basically every time, nobody notices or cares that I turn so I can see people. And they certainly don't move around while waiting in line as much as these guys did. One of them was fully staring at me, and his expression was just plain unsettling. But he hadn't done anything, so I just smiled, gave a half nod, and looked away while still keeping them in my field of view. The guys were whispering amongst themselves, even though nobody could understand their language, and it wasn't exactly quiet in there. But I just had this gut feeling that they were talking about me, because they both kept openly staring at me, and nobody else, even though it was fairly busy. Then they started moving so they were directly behind me, and for 4 minutes straight, I looked at my phone, every time I moved because I was uncomfortable with them directly behind me, they'd move to be directly behind me again. Every time they would look at something on display, but it just seemed so forced, like they weren't actually interested in the unicorn toys, and were just looking at them to be behind me. About every 15 seconds for 4 minutes while we were in this line, it happened over and over. They'd even go back and look at something they'd already looked at, and they went back to that same unicorn toy 4 times. I felt like I was crazy because maybe one of them had a daughter or a niece who would like that toy, but every time I looked close enough, they were staring at me, watching me. I was seriously freaked out, but I kept telling myself that they weren't after me or anything. But just to be safe, I decided to not go fill the water bottles and just go straight to the car. It wasn't worth risking it. I was still 3 people away from the front of the line. There was some sort of issue with a membership card that was holding it up, and more people had lined up behind the men. One was a middle-aged woman and her teenager, a 13 or 14-year-ish kid. The woman saw my discomfort and saw how they kept getting behind me over and over. So she sent her teenager to see if the self-checkouts were open. At this gas station, it was a 50-50 chance that they were. They went down a lot. Meanwhile, the men were getting closer and closer to me. I had already gotten as close to the person in front of me as socially allowed, but these guys were breathing down my neck and even brushing against me while they looked at the displays of candy and unicorn toys. I was contemplating leaving the snacks on the counter and walking out. The teenager came back and must have whispered to the woman that the self-checkout was open. So the woman walked up to me, took me by the arm, and led me to the self-checkout. We watched each other's backs while we checked out, and I looked up and saw those guys still staring at me, and this time they looked fully angry at me. They were about to come over and talk to me when the woman grabbed my bag and receipt from me and walked me out to my car. Somehow, she was so smooth with everything, I don't think her teenager even noticed what was going on. Once we were outside and I saw my car right there with my hubby and kid, I gave her a hug and thanked her for helping me get out of there. Then we parted ways. I told my hubby about everything, trying not to get too emotional about it, just stating the facts about what these guys did and how they behaved. He seemed equally freaked out by my description of the events and wished he'd had the chance to properly thank the woman. I filled our water bottles at the next gas station, and we moved out of that area about 6 months later. Anyway, if the woman happens to hear this, you are my hero. Thank you. I don't think I can fully describe how deeply I was uncomfortable in that situation. I was genuinely scared that those guys would follow me to my car or something else. "14-Year-Olds versus Boiler Ghost" by Appropriate Tie. I don't know what possessed me to share this, but here goes. First off, this is a true story. Not a story that's scary because it's labeled as true. Stories about drug addicts and ghosts. So, rewind a handful of years back to 14-year-old me and my best friend at the time. We'd been goofing off all day outside because it was the summer, and we finally decided to go back into the safety of the air conditioning. We had the kind of dynamic that when one started laughing, it would get progressively worse until our bellies were shaking and our lungs were begging for air. This is relevant because while we were enjoying the warm, really bright sunny afternoon, we heard something that made us instantly go dead silent. As we were laughing in a fit of hysteria, suddenly, a very clear male voice laughed what sounded like right behind us. Bear with me here if you don't believe in ghosts, because this is just half the story. I remember it was so loud, gruff, and just, you don't hear that every day, you know? We turned to each other slowly, eyes wide, and then burst out in laughter so hard I almost tipped backwards in my kitchen chair. It scared us so much that we couldn't contain how funny it was to see each other being scared shitless. For a long time, we told that story of the random giggling ghost we heard, but it turned much more grim in my head as I began to realize the full nature of that day. So, fast forward a couple of years, and honestly, this is the part that creeps me out. It was 2022 and I was 16. My mom and stepdad had noticed that odd things were going on in our boiler room behind our house. For one, we didn't have a lock that properly functioned on the door, so they would go back there to the door, sometimes just being fully swung open with the light on. Over time, they noticed things being moved around and trash being left in the room, and at times, needles. We discovered that before our stay there, the place we lived was a major drug house. I'm sure you've already begun to paint a picture of what went on that day when my friend and I were goofing off. If not, I'll paint that map. In the kitchen where we sat, we heard the disembodied voice coming from behind us. But it sounded faint enough to be from another room. The boiler room was on the other side of the wall next to the kitchen table. All in all, we quite literally might not have been alone that day, which to me is scarier than it being a ghost. To this day, I have no idea who was in the boiler room listening to us chat about school, boys, anime, and other random nonsense. You could hear absolutely everything from that room, as I'd been out there before. Conversations in it sound clear as day. This was followed by a number of instances over the years where I'd been alone in the kitchen late at night between 12 and 4 a.m. and heard scuffles coming from seemingly nowhere. Just movement, like someone moving around or moving things around. I mean, there is an off chance that it could have been paranormal, but I kind of doubt it. The laugh was so loud, it literally just sounded like a man in the other room. I laugh about this now. I always kind of have, but for dramatic effect. But now I realize how dangerous that situation was. We were completely alone that day with some random, maybe even violent person in the other room. A complete stranger. The boiler room man. Ooh. Anyway, keep your doors locked, guys. Police Escort by Spirit of Angie. So my friend and I were underage and a little buzzed from party hopping all night. We rolled up to a Wendy's and ditched our empty bottles of Smirnoff Ice as we waited for our food at 2 a.m. in the drive-thru. I had no idea that it was illegal to be out past a certain time if I was under 18, unsupervised, and now it was way past midnight in Arizona. I got a text from a friend and she asked me to get her order, and we would meet her at an intersection to eat with us. Okay, sounded chill enough. I got to that intersection and there weren't any gas stations or grocery stores, just some creepy office buildings and a dirt lot. I stupidly picked the dirt lot to wait for my friend, who called me and was like, "Hey, I'm at the intersection, are you okay?" I said, "Oh, I see you." And she replied, "Is that you with the cops behind you?" I said no, only to discover that in fact the cops were behind me. Luckily, the car smelled like food and not booze and cigarettes. But the cop knew I was under the influence, and I did have a large bottle of rum that had already been opened, and I was trying desperately to hide it under my shirt before he knocked on the window. And he wasn't stupid. And it's fucking Arizona. No one gets away with a DUI in Tent City Central. The cop asked me and my friend for our parents' phone numbers. My friend's mom got a call to come pick her up, and she got a verbal lashing from the cop about being underage past curfew, and explained the citation, so I already knew what was coming my way. I, however, didn't have a voicemail set up on my new Nokia Fat phone, and refused to give my parents' house phone, back when those were still everywhere. I told him they simply didn't have one, only a cell number, and I put it to silent as he repeatedly called. I told him that they were probably out with their friends, and the cop said okay, explained the ticket to me, and I thought I was going to get away scot-free. And that's when he said he was going to follow me home. I made sure to go the speed limit and not make any errors, but I was shitting myself right then. I parked my car out in front of my house, and my parents' cars were in the closed garage, and the house was dark. I was like, yes! It looked like no one was home. The cop proceeded to park his car and said, "Hey, you could have broken the rules a little with getting home. I wasn't going to pull you over twice." As he followed me to the front door. I unlocked it and nervously said thank you, but he, instead of ringing the doorbell or doing their famous police officer knock, followed me into my house and locked the door behind us. He was talking to me, making small conversation, checking out my living room, and I was starting to freeze up because suddenly I was sensing a different energy from him. He asked me where my bedroom was and told me to take him to it. I instead took him into my parents' room and turned on the light, 100% thankful to see my sleepy-eyed parents, shocked to see an armed grown man behind their young daughter. The cop just let out a breath and said in my ear, "You lied to me, sweetheart." And then he went back into police mode, telling my parents that he found me out in an illegal time and that I needed to pay a fine and attend a class, which was embarrassing because I was 18 at the time and had to take the class with a bunch of 12 and 14-year-olds. But anyway, I never told anyone about this until now, about the comments that he made to me, but my dad did ask why he was in the house. I told my dad I didn't understand that either. The cop never read me any rights, he just followed me home. Before he left, he said, "That's a nice house phone you have right there. Looks new and shiny." It was the last thing he told me before he let me go. I can't help but think back to that night and think about what would have happened if I had bad parents who weren't home or were out of town. I know there are good cops out there. I personally know some. I go back and forth with being freaked out or okay, maybe he was just being thorough. But the comments are what struck me, though, and that sinking gut feeling I had. Interested in hearing your opinions. Poltergeist, submitted by Kelly N. Up until this last fall, my family and I have not believed in ghosts, spirits, demons, or anything. We recently moved into an old condominium, and immediately we began to make changes to it. When we got settled in, we slowly began to feel uncomfortable and irritable. We ignored those feelings for about a month or two because we had not yet seen or heard anything too vivid. About 3 months after we were done with painting and renovations, I had to go to the hospital for a minor surgery. After I was well enough to come home, I slept on the couch for a whole 2 weeks, loaded on heavy medications. One day, as I was lying on the couch, I saw a shadow in the dining room. It was a dark figure that just seemed to stride right through it. And I freaked out and quickly called for my mom. She went upstairs and knocked on her boyfriend's son's room to see if it had been him in the dining room. And our whole upstairs is open to the downstairs, so I watched as she was knocking on the door. But suddenly, something caught my attention by the stairway. When I looked, I immediately started to scream and cry. There was a little boy in dark overalls with blonde hair that folded over his eyes, that were black with dark circles around them. He stood there and stared down at me for about 5 seconds, long enough for me to get a good look, which for a traumatizing incident is unforgettable. My mom turned around when she heard me, and the boy vanished. My mom said that I was just hallucinating because of my medication, but I really saw him. The following day, I was admitted back into the hospital for severe dehydration and extreme headaches and migraines. The doctor said that dehydration could cause hallucinations. But my mom went home for about an hour and came back to the hospital as pale as a ghost. I asked her what was wrong, and she said that she was sorry for blaming the meds for what I had said I'd seen. She said that the first week that we had moved in, she had been sleeping and had a glass of water by her side. She woke up thirsty and went to reach for her cup, but the cup wasn't where she'd left it. She was looking for it, and when she looked back, it was right there in her face. After those incidents, we stopped having weird things happen, and we became comfortable again. But in the new year, it started again. We kept hearing people walking around upstairs when no one was home, and when getting ready for school one morning, I made my bed and set the remote and cell phone right next to each other at the end of my bed. I sat on the floor tying my shoes, ready to leave, and I reached up for my phone, and it wasn't where I had just set it. I looked around frantically, and I looked up where the remote was again, and there it was, right where I had left it, but now it was upside down. I have severe OCD, and I know where I had put it, and how I had left it sitting there. More recently, my mom had been on the couch with her boyfriend. They were home alone, and she felt comfortable until James started to fall asleep. She began to feel as if someone was standing in the dining room looking at her. And then she heard the cupboards in the kitchen opening and closing on their own, and the dishes rustling around in the sink. She got up expecting to see a mouse scurry across the floor, when all of a sudden the sounds stopped. She calmed herself down and walked over to the door and locked it, then walked back over to the couch, and the doorknob on the front door began to jiggle. She freaked out and looked at James, who was now wide awake, and asked if she had shoved his face into the pillow. And she said, "I haven't even touched you." Not only were we sensing something was there, our family dog started to go over to the living room closet and scratch at it, sniff and growl, and even bark. So far, that's what's happened. But it's so major, we just can't get over it. We went to our church, but our pastor, Father Anthony, is in India on some missionary work for an entire year, so he can't come and bless our house. The noises keep progressing, and the hide-and-go-seek games aren't stopping. Any ideas of what this could be and what I can do? Was he there the whole time? By nuclear hologram. This happened to me close to 7 p.m. the other night. I'd taken my dog out for a walk, and there's a ditch area in my neighborhood that's kind of like a little copse. It's a big enough area and separated from the houses that sometimes I let my dog run around off his leash for a few minutes before getting him back to the main street. Last night I chose to do that. Things were normal, so I was paying attention to that dog and sending some texts and voicemails to my siblings and my best friend, just about the recent snow. The only thing that happened before I turned to leave was that while my dog was sniffing at a tree, I couldn't see what happened, but it seemed like a few branches moved suddenly and heavily. I thought my dog was just tugging on something to play with, and he acted surprised but didn't bark or anything. I was going to walk all the way to the other side of the copse because it was closer at that point, but my dog wanted to go back the way we came. I just followed him and things still felt normal. I even stopped to take another picture. At the very last moment, when I put the leash back on my dog and we were walking back up the hill to the main street, that's when I felt like looking back over my shoulder. There was a man, maybe 20 feet behind me, stumbling out of the entrance to the copse. I immediately felt fear and ran the best I could in the snow with my dog, trying to make sure he didn't pull me down from running. Thankfully, my house wasn't too far from that area, and I just went straight there. And after that, so much made sense. I've been having really weird rabbit hole thoughts lately, and ultimately I wonder if that man was waiting for me, or was it truly random? I have no idea how long or why he was in the copse, and I asked my boyfriend, if you saw some random woman with her dog over there, you wouldn't even walk towards them, would you? And he said, any normal man would probably just leave them alone. There's no way that person could have been up to any good, right? Hey gang, thanks for listening to this episode of Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories. If you have a true scary story of any nature that you'd like to hear narrated on this channel or the podcast, email it to unclejoshtruescarystories@gmail.com. I read them all. Follow me on social media, and of course, if you've got a moment and you liked what you heard in this episode, give the video a thumbs up. Leave a comment, I'd love to know what you thought of the stories. And if you'd like to take your support of the channel a step further, find my link to Patreon in the description, or consider purchasing some Uncle Josh and Campfire Crew merchandise. A link to my TeePublic storefront is down there too. I apologize for my voice, it's a little gravelly here. I've been working a ton, I actually have to head out of town for work, and little hoarse here. So again, apologize for the voice, but I still wanted to get an episode out before I took off. Everyone, be excellent to each other. And until next time, be wary of things that go bump in the night. It could be anything. A ghost, a monster, or the guy next door.